What we'll do here is we'll spend the first part of our time just talking about what is trauma. Then, assuming I don't get long-winded in the first part of the time, and when am I supposed to land the plane? You should never give a pastor a microphone and they don't know the end time. That's a danger malpractice thing. What time am I supposed to land this plane? Okay, that's wonderful. And then hopefully we'll spend some time looking at the subject of abuse as well. So trauma is kind of the outcome. Abuse is one potential cause. There's other causes to trauma other than abuse, but abuse is unfortunately a common one. Now, if we were to go with some fairly non-technical definitions of trauma, one way to think about trauma is a normal response to an abnormal circumstance. That if you had 50 people on a tourism bus in the Himalayas, and there was a major earthquake, and that bus was stranded for a period of time, and they wondered if they were going to survive. And on that bus, you had young people and old people. You had people who were physically fit and people who were not physically fit. You had people who were Christian and Buddhist and Islam and no faith affiliation. You had males and females. You could divide that bus of people up in a whole variety of ways. And the symptom clusters that are trauma would show up across the board. Because trauma is a normal response to an abnormal circumstance. The abnormal circumstance is fearing for your life in a bus accident. Most of us don't do that. When you go through something like that, the responses of trauma are a normal response to that. Another way of thinking about trauma. Trauma is when the then and there supercharges the here and now in a way that it's hard to respond to the here and now on its own terms. Again, hopefully that doesn't sound too fancy or complicated. You think kind of classically about the war veteran. They've been in an environment where loud, sudden sounds are a life and death threat. They come home. They're walking down the sidewalk, and a car backfires. All of a sudden, the then and there supercharges the here and now in such a way that they're not responding to the here and now on its own terms. Like their body has a reflex that says, I'm not on a sidewalk next to a park in a safe place. And so that's another way of defining trauma. Another way of defining trauma. It's when we go through something more than we're prepared to go through at the time that we experience it. Well, in a school setting, that matters a lot. One thing that means is that what is traumatic for a six-year-old might not be traumatic for a 26-year-old. If as I'm getting a ride from one place to another from the staff here, if they get mad at me and just pull over next to a building and say, get out, I'm done with you, you're getting on my nerves. Well, at my age and with a cell phone, that's just rude. If I'm 6 and I don't have a cell phone and I don't know how I'm getting home, that's traumatic for me because it was more than I was prepared to go through at the time that I went through it. Again, this is one where there can be a cumulative effect. maybe I look at myself and say, I'm a grown person. But in a 6-month period of time, I lose my job, my spouse dies of cancer, and I have a house fire. Well, maybe I could have handled 1 or 2 of those things by themselves, but the cumulative effect of those in a short period of time becomes more than I was prepared to go through at the time that I go through it. So again, trauma is a normal response to an abnormal circumstance. Trauma is when the then and there supercharges the here and now in a way that it's harder to respond to the here and now on its own terms. That trauma is more than I'm prepared to go through at the time that I have to go through it. Another kind of maybe theological summary term for trauma is suffering. When we ask, like, what causes the various hardships in our life, some things come from sin. Like when our beliefs and values and choices are the primary thing that are contributing to our life struggle, we do that. And there's lots of things that we do because we're all sinners that make our life harder. Praise God for the blood of Jesus. There's also things that make our life harder that we didn't do, that happen to us more than it comes from us. Trauma is a form of suffering. Now, if we talk about what are some common symptom clusters for trauma, I'm going to briefly discuss 5. This is where I will use a little bit more technical language, but I will try to define the language in ways that is approachable. So we'll talk about hypervigilance, intrusive symptoms, constriction, shame, and fragmentation. Again, if you really want to take notes, I'll say those things again. That hypervigilance, symptoms of intrusion, constriction, shame, fragmentation. If you look in most of your clinical literature that's diagnostic in nature, they're going to emphasize those first 3. I think the last 2 are worth mentioning in a discussion of trauma as well. So hypervigilance. Hyper means elevated. Vigilant means to be on guard. Hypervigilance means you have an elevated sense of guardedness at most times. Well, let's think about what happens in the midst of trauma. Trauma rarely makes an appointment. Invariably, trauma comes as a surprise. If something significantly changes your life and it catches you off guard, you begin to live by the rule that the most important thing to pay attention to is whatever you're not paying attention to at the moment. Because obviously you missed it last time. And so, again, a population that experiences a fair amount of trauma is first responders, police officers, EMTs. Oftentimes, folks from that group, if they come into a setting like this, they do not want to sit with their back to the door. They want to be able to see the entry point so that they have the opportunity to respond to whatever goes on. That's a form of hypervigilance. Again, don't over-apply this one, but if you have a student And the most important thing for them to pay attention to is not what they're focusing on at the moment. They're going to be distracted a lot. They're scanning. They're trying to pay attention to what's going to go wrong that would significantly change my life. Focus and concentration is really hard after trauma. Again, out of that just sense of the most important thing for me to pay attention to is whatever I'm not paying attention to at the moment. Intrusive symptoms. This is kind of your classic triggers, nightmares, flashbacks. Intrusive just means unwanted. Again, that veteran who's walking down the sidewalk next to a peaceful park and the car backfires, and like that sense in which they are taken back to a place they didn't want to go. Again, I had a grandfather who was a World War II veteran. Up in his musty attic, there were all kinds of treasures. Chest with maps and manuals and things of that nature that I never understood why he didn't want to go look at those with me. Those things, I could be curious that there was a lot of intrusive thoughts and memories and emotions that was going to come with that for him. I didn't realize that at the time. Constriction. Again, kind of a playful illustration that we can use here. You may remember as a child jumping on a trampoline. You'd get up on the trampoline, and as you would jump, it just felt like you could soar. Like there was this artificially inflated experience of how high you could jump. And then we get off the trampoline, we put on our shoes, and we try to jump again. Do you remember what that felt like? It was like your feet barely came off the ground. The artificially high experience made the normal experience feel muted. It made it feel like nothing. If you've this may just me be being an old man, but you go to a movie theater where the sound's way too loud. And then you get out and you accuse everybody else of mumbling. The artificially loud sound of the movie theater made the normal speaking range harder to pick up on. Again, think with me for a moment. Trauma. It's an artificially high experience. It's like being on the trampoline emotionally. And then you come into the realm of day-to-day life. And it's like those things don't move me anymore. I feel so disinterested, unmoved, unmotivated. I feel like I don't even care. I'm emotionally numb. Again, part of what's happening there is with my emotions, it's like the trampoline effect. It was artificially accelerated, elevated, and then once I get outside of that experience, the normal range just doesn't register with me the same way. Trauma, particularly for things like abuse. Another common impact of trauma is shame. You recognize, if I tell somebody about what happened, it could change a lot. Again, just a common experience here. that you don't have to raise your hand, you don't have to share, but remember as a child, the first time you did something bad. Okay, I'm not going to make you share at church. And you had a secret. And your parents said something like, "I love you." What was your response to that? Would you if you knew? That having a secret, having something that you didn't feel like you could talk about, was haunting. Again, the child who comes to school and they get asked, "How was your weekend?" And at 8 years old, and 10 years old, and 12 years old, they've got to find a way to navigate that very dangerous question. Because there's a sense of, if I'm really honest, I don't know what this is going to change, but I feel like it's going to change a lot. And when I've got something that I can't talk about, and I don't know how the nice people in my world are going to respond if I said it, that feels like shame. Again, out of that example I gave of how was your weekend, that pretty good illustration of what we would mean by fragmentation. That, again, if we think of our life story like a big plate, and you drop the plate and it breaks, and you hold up a couple of pieces as if they were the whole, you're holding fragments, but you're treating it like the whole. That's kind of what fragmentation is. And so that young person who they get asked, "How was your weekend?" They've got to find a couple of fragments that they can share and sell it like it's the whole story. That's a really lonely way to live. You know, sometimes when we think about trauma, we only think about the anxiety side of it. That's painful. I don't want to downplay that at all. I think the side that we often neglect to understand is the lonely side. That I have to give people the fragments of my life that they can handle. Again, when we think about students, they're like little Tom Cruises going, "You can't handle the truth." And it's not selfish deceit. It's actually, if I share part of my story, it feels like it would be unloving to you. I don't know what it would do to you. My story feels contagious, like it's a virus. And so I don't want to be alone, so I give you just enough that is socially acceptable, and then enjoy whatever level of relationship that allows me to have. So again, that's when we say trauma. In our day and age, trauma's become a trendy word. And as somebody who does quite a bit in the area of counseling, I will just admit, counseling words become very trendy. Have you noticed that? Like those of us who have gray hair, we can almost tell our life story based on the trendy counseling word. You know, for a while, addiction was the new thing. And everything that you liked a lot, you were addicted to it. and then it was compulsive. And OCD, like anytime you liked order, you were just one of your compulsions. And then it was narcissist. Like everybody that was selfish and mean was a narcissist, and there just weren't enough narcissists in the world for all the people that we were calling narcissists. Like statistically, you could just look at it and go, what percent of the population they are and how many people that we've identified as narcissists, and it just, like, it didn't work. And right now, the trendy word is trauma. And trauma's become this way of speaking with flair to say anything that's really hard. Now, here's where my caution is when we acknowledge that counseling words can be trendy words. We can dismiss the trendy word. We can assume because it's overused that it's invalid. Well, the thing is, addiction really does exist. And compulsion is a real thing. And there are narcissists. I've met a few. And trauma's real. Just because the word gets overused in a popular way doesn't mean we need to dismiss the valid use of the word. And so what I've tried to do here is, you may hear a child's story and go, that was so hard. And then just the word that has the most flair that we could attach to it would be that had to be traumatic. And it seems like the most compassionate way to describe what they went through. And if it's just a statement of compassion, that's not that bad. But when we say traumatic in a technical sense, we're asking, is there hypervigilance? Is this someone who is living on guard in a very consistent, if not constant way, where it's really hard for them to be fully present and engage in a moment? Are there symptoms of intrusion? You come by and you place your hand on the child's shoulder and they flinch because an unexpected touch feels dangerous. Is there this muted, flat affect? Again, that emotional trampoline effect, where there's a stuntedness in their ability to respond to a situation. Is there a sense of shame? I'm carrying a secret that I can't talk about. And then I hear bells. Fragmentation. In a room like this, where the type of role that we play a casual social role. Probably the one of those symptoms that we're going to have the most impact on is shame. Like, we're probably not going to help with intrusive symptom management. Like, that's it's just going to be a little outside our pay grade. The one that will have the most impact on is shame. Because if you look at shame, like you study it, and there's a few people that I've read their books, and they're shame experts. They do shame brain scans and all the things, and it's fascinating to look at the way the different regions of the brain stop talking to one another when we experience shame. Like, it's not just that when I experience shame, I feel socially isolated. My internal experience becomes very isolated and compartmentalized too. But you read those really fancy books that are great. You're like, what is one of the most powerful tools to alleviate shame? It's somebody who knows your story, and when they look at you, there is warm, affirming eye contact. It's not putting magnets on your head to make parts of your brain talk to one another that didn't want to talk to one another. Again, there's things that are a little more technical with the other symptom clusters that can be useful. This is where folks like counselors, they, in some ways, just the fact that a counselor can be left in the little box that is their office is useful for trauma. Like it's a relief to know that the person that I'm talking to about those really hard things isn't going to pop up on the sidewalk somewhere and greet me and ask, "How are you doing?" Which is a really loaded question when I've told you the hardest parts of my life. Is that a Southern howdy, or is that a, like, you want to know something about me? Are you wanting an update? And so, again, these are things that, when it comes to thinking in a school environment, so this is beginning to transition towards the subject of abuse. The simple phrase that I give to folks when it's like, how do we respond to abuse? If it's a child, report. If it's an adult, support. If it's a child, report. If it's an adult, support. Now, every time a kid flinches doesn't mean you're calling CPS. It's not bad if you do. Like, calling CPS is not pressing charges on somebody. It's getting an expert second opinion. That's all it is. Anybody here have a social work background? Okay. Social workers are not bored. Amen? Okay? These are not folks that are looking for cases to take to validate their existence. Social workers are some of the most overworked, prone to burnout people that I know. When we need to call CPS and I am disappointed, it is usually because they did less than I thought they ought to do, not because they did more than I thought they ought to. And that's not because they don't care. It's either because the evidence was not as strong as the subjective report was to me, or they're just overworked. But these are things that, as we see these types of responses, we look for an opportunity to say, "How you doing? I'm glad you're here. Hey, if you ever just wanted to talk, I'd listen." Because if we had to mention, like, what are two of the things that trauma does? Well, one, it robs us of our voice. Again, especially with abuse. No doesn't mean no, or doesn't result in no. Stop doesn't result in stop. Kind of akin to that is it removes our sense of personal agency. I don't think my choices matter. I don't think my choices can make my life better. I begin to live as if my choices can only make my life worse. When in our roles, we make those kinds of statements like, "I'm glad you're here. that may be unique for them. If you wanted to talk, I'd listen. That's leaving the volitional element in their world. But I can open the door. Like, I don't want to metaphorically shove you through it. But I can pleasantly let you know that door is open. If they look stressed, sometimes life's hard, isn't it? Just something that says, like, I see you. You don't have to go through this alone. That's laying down the kind of breadcrumbs that invites them to talk to you. Now, pivoting here a little bit to the experience of abuse. Let's see if we... All right, there we go. This may be a little more geared towards abuse in the home, that we often think of just the violent act. I want us to see the larger experience. And so in ministry circles, I think what we want is something like, or at least this gives us the baseline for how we're going to get to what we want, and then I'm going to pivot off of what we want. So, there's generally the significance of the event and the level of human response. And so, holiness and justice, kind of symmetrical between those two things. For some of us, it's been a while since we did an XY axis chart, but hopefully this can become intuitive. Where's my math teachers that are really excited about this for the moment? Like, if we just looked at it down here on this side, this is kids won't put their stinking wet towel in the laundry basket. Then there's I failed a test, more towards the middle. I ran away from home. That's what a holy, just, loving, proportional, God-honoring response. As the significance of the event increases, the level of human response should be proportional to it. And so when we think about abuse or neglect, this is what we want. Again, my math teacher over here, we'll talk about standard deviations. We want to know, like, what's the yellow flag, the orange flag, the red flag. We want to know, like, how far off of that line are we? And it's not good, but it's not bad. And then the spot where it's like bad, and then like the red is we need to call somebody. And we want to be proportional. We don't want to overreact. We want to be fair, especially in a church setting. Here's one of the things. I've worked in a private practice setting. I've worked in a church setting. When I was in private practice, one of the great things about being in that setting is my counselees didn't cluster together into a congregation. They didn't talk to one another. Every conversation was an island. In a church, that's not the case. Every congregant clusters into a congregation and sheep talk. And so, like, why did you say this for that person and not this for me? It's as if everything that's said is precedent for something else. And so we want to be fair. And so we want these clear lines where we can where we can show that across the board we're being fair and proportional. Does that make sense? Now, a chart like this, if we could make it, I would argue is only useful for the most sadistic cases that exist. If it's on the top half of abuse, and the most chronic cases of neglect, that if it's on the bottom. Like if this chart is useful, the problematic person is doing the problematic thing all of the time. And so if we ask, what is the actual experience of abuse? It's much more like this. It's that purple dotted erratic line. Abuse is not consistent. Again, it is sadistic torture if it's consistent. This is why people in abusive environments feel crazy. They never know what they're going to get. I can leave that towel on the floor and get smacked up for it. And I could be gone for 3 days and not tell you where I was, and you're like, I just don't have time for this. Where is a sense of proportionality in that? And then we talk to the person who's abusive or neglectful. And if you look at that purple line, there's times when it crosses the green line. And there's times when it crosses the yellow lines. And they go, look, was I bad here? Was I bad here? I was all right in these situations. And look, I know in this situation I could respond a little better. And when we talk to them, what part of the purple line are they going to talk about? They're going to talk about the parts that cross the green line and the yellow line. And they're not lying. And when we talk to the student, what part are they going to tell us about? Where it crosses the orange lines and the red lines. And they're not lying. And if we think that we're going to define abuse like this, we have no idea how to reconcile those stories. When we recognize abuse is much more like this. Oh, well, that makes sense. That's how these disclosures would go. Again, a friend of mine, Darby Strickland, who does a lot of work in this area, she says one of the limitations that many of us face is, as a statement of compassion, we would often say to someone who's experienced abuse, I can't imagine what you've been through. And as a statement of compassion, that's totally fine. It's a problem. If I can't imagine what you've been through, I have no idea what questions to ask. If I don't know what it's like to live scared, if I don't know what it's like to look at the kitchen table, and if I see a glass of Coke with ice in it and there is no meal, I need to find a safe place. Because that ain't just Coke. That's Jack and Coke. And if we're not having a meal and somebody's sitting at a table sipping on a drink like that, they're about to get unruly. But if you've never scanned your environment that way, that doesn't make sense. If what door a family member comes through, how loud or softly that door closes, Like, if those aren't things that have ever been really important to you, it impedes our ability to ask good questions and to understand. Again, what do you hear in that from what we talked about earlier? Hypervigilance. You learn what inconsequential things really matter. And you're scanning your environment for that. So, here, if we just talk about a journey, this is from a different presentation, so we're not going to be able to do everything that's here, but I think the outline is useful. These things, they exist on a timeline. Abuse happens. It may be one climactic event. It may be a series of climactic events. And you know what one of the most offensive things is after abuse? Silence. How many of you remember 9/11? What would it be like if you went to work the next day or went to school the next day and everything was just normal? Like that event, you couldn't go the next day to anything. We were in a state of collective shock. And that collective shock somehow validated what each one of us was going through. And we recognized it really was that bad. What if 9/11 happened at your house last night? And you've got a spelling test today. And the teacher says, next word you need to spell is fair. Spell fair. Pay attention. What is wrong with you? Why can't you focus today? There's everybody acting like nothing just happened. Lots of shame gets embedded in that silence. Lots of lies and false messages get embedded in that silence. There is the moment of disclosure. The scariest and most courageous thing somebody will ever do. Where they've wanted to do it for a really long time. They've wanted to do it for so long, they've kind of idealized what's going to happen when they finally talk about it. They have expectations of you. You can tell by the way they're talking and the way that they're looking at you, you're not sure you can meet those expectations. Most important thing that you can say when somebody begins to confide their story in you. Thank you. Thank you for trusting me with that. There's nothing you're going to say that's going to answer and make okay. Like often for many of us, that's where we get in trouble. We want to make things okay. Again, this is country folksy kind of Brad, but the impulse to want to make things okay too fast is why people say stupid stuff at funerals. Because they want to say something that is much more about comforting them, about them being uncomfortable in this moment, than it is actually what is helpful for you. And so this is one where if you don't know what to say thank you. Thank you for the courage. Thank you for trusting me. Again, one of the best pieces of counseling advice I ever got. If you don't know what to say, ask more questions. Rarely do we offend people with a sincere, humble question. It's when we start making statements that we can get clumsy. Now, if you're like, what do we do next? Churchcares.com, we mentioned that a little bit yesterday. That's a free resource. I got to be a part of putting that together in terms of Christian leaders from all over the country who do work in a variety of backgrounds. I will tell you, that was a phenomenal team to get to work with. If you go to churchcares.com, it's 12, 20-minute videos. That's just, what is that immediate response plan of how do I receive that disclosure and know what to do next? It's free. You can watch it. I think one of the most beneficial things that you will get is not just information. You'll get to hear the voice of really experienced people talk about these things. One of the contributors to that series is a lady named Diane Lingberg. She was doing abuse and trauma care before it was cool. She's a West Virginia grandma. Her grandkids call her Tata. She is spunky as all get out. But I remember the first time I got to hear her speak. Had no idea who she was. I went to a breakout session at a conference on sexual abuse. I was 15 minutes into the session. And it just hit me. That's what sexual abuse counseling ought to sound like. There was a strength, there was a sturdiness, there was a patience and a compassion. There was a righteous anger that was controlled, it was like, lady, you've been doing this for a while. I don't want to just say the things you say. I want to be able to talk the way you talk, especially in a moment where I feel scared to death. And so, with a video series like this, that's why I was really glad Diane said yes to that project. To get to hear not just the information, but from people who have walked alongside others for a long time, the immediate response plan. Then there's whatever ongoing care plan. In a church, in a school, we're going to be in a supportive role. We're probably not going to be running point on that. If something illegal happened, we need law enforcement, or we need CPS. If acute care is needed for significant trauma symptoms, we want a counselor involved with that. But just because other people are involved in more formal ways doesn't remove the role of the church. Again, one way to maybe say that, I hope it makes sense, is counseling without friendship is stigma. If the only person I can talk to is in a professional, in an office, and my life is so broken that that's the only person who can relate to me, it's helpful, but I start to feel self-conscious about it. The caring support, warm eye contact, affirmation. This is hard, but you're being strong. And one of the things when our younger son was little that he liked to do, and I stand by it. For a season of my life, I didn't like it. I told my boys, whatever dream you want to chase, I'll chase it with you. And on a whim, we did a 5K, and he loved it. And he created the goal that he wanted to run a marathon before he graduated high school. Bless his heart. We got as far as a half marathon before he got bored. We were training. He was running. He started crying in public. And I'm like, what's wrong? He said, I'm bored. Not I'm tired, I'm bored. And I'm like, dude, people are going to think I am punishing you by running if you keep crying like this in public. You've got to dry this up. Okay. But when you're at the end of a race like that, how do you feel? Exhausted. When we're exhausted, our normal self-perception is that we're weak. How does everybody else who's watching the folks who ran the marathon look at the people who are exhausted in the race? They're strong. For this person who they're running the hardest race they've ever run, and they're exhausted. And they feel weak. And that weakness that they feel echoes every imposed lie that they have heard about themselves for as long as they've been through this. Do you know what it means to have people who are encouraging you? Who can say, I admire your courage, I admire your strength. Like, that's the kind of role. Oh, we can do that. And it makes a world of difference. So, that's my attempt to walk through what is trauma. Like, how can we understand that in everyday language that honors the technical categories? And then trying to give us a framework for what is it like to live in an abusive environment. And then we kind of put those two things together with what is that journey for someone being in that abusive, traumatic context, and them coming to us and the role that we would play as we receive that disclosure. If that's overwhelming for you, that's normal. This does feel intimidating. But if it gives you a sense of, I think I could walk into this with a little more sense of my bearings. I could see the map. I have an idea of what I'm looking for in listening. The things that would be, that I would contribute to this now feel a lot more achievable and clear to me. We did everything we were going to do in an hour on a Monday morning. So, I don't know what we do from here, but if somebody wanted to rescue me from this microphone, I would let them.
Thank you, Pastor. Let's see. Good question. I mean, you really did was really good job. It's new for me. I don't know, how is it for you guys? Like to identify. I like that churchcares.com advice. And so we have 20 sessions that you can look on. Is it 20?
12 20-minute sessions.
Oh, 12 20-minute.
And those are pastor 20 minutes. So some of them may be 23, 25. Those are very much pastoral 20-minute segments. We're in the same boat.
We call it like the Baptist count.
Yeah.
Okay, so I kind of didn't want to break our opportunity up because now would be a good time to ask a couple questions and maybe have discussion. At the same time, we have the eatery, like a coffee. Is that right, Jen? Okay, so is that good, Pastor Barry? Because most of the folks are like your people, or there's a mix. But teachers, so we have teachers. Maybe they could identify with some of the descriptive pictures that you gave on trauma, and children, and then, of course, people in the church maybe that might be identifiable as being traumatized. You know, I remember we had this brother who was in war in Iraq, and he became a drug addict when he got home because he was on a Humvee with a machine gun, and he was to protect the platoon, and the platoon got wiped out right in front of his eyes, and he was here. He was in rehab in Baltimore, and then, he came and he was in Fed Hill. But literally, like Justin said, he could walk into a room and suddenly, like, he would just change, his body language would change, and he would just back up and and you had no idea that he was suffering like he was, So I think it'd be great if we could keep on, and do that, and we go to the eatery, we'll have a microphone there. So it'll be like 10, 15 minutes of casual, going there to the eatery, and then we can have a rap session with Pastor Brad, okay? So you're dismissed. We'll see you at the eatery.